The wooden platform creaked beneath Fiona Brennan's boots as rough hands shoved her forward into the harsh afternoon sun, and she lifted her chin despite the iron terror coiling in her stomach, refusing to let these men see her break. The year was 1887, and Columbus, New Mexico, was nothing more than a collection of weathered buildings clustered along the southern border. A town where decent people locked their doors at dusk and outlaws rode through with impunity. Fiona had arrived 3 weeks ago on a stage from Kansas City, clutching a letter from her uncle who had promised her honest work at his general store. She had found his grave instead, fresh earth still dark with recent rain, and the men who killed him waiting. Now she stood on an auction block in the center of town, while a crowd of leering faces gathered below. Her dark auburn hair had come loose from its pins during her captivity, falling in waves past her shoulders, and her green eyes blazed with fury even as her hands trembled. She was 22 years old, and she had never imagined her life would come to this. "Gentlemen." The auctioneer's voice boomed across the dusty street. His name was Rake Dutton, a thick-necked man with greasy hair and a reputation for cruelty that extended from El Paso to Santa Fe. "What we have here is a rare specimen indeed. Look at that face, that figure. This one's got breeding, got education. She can read and write, cook and sew. But more importantly, just feast your eyes on that beauty." Fiona's stomach churned as the men below began shouting, their voices blending into a cacophony of crude suggestions and bids. She searched desperately for a friendly face in the crowd, for anyone who might help her, but saw only greed and lust reflected back. The sheriff stood at the edge of the gathering, arms crossed, making no move to intervene. She had learned quickly that law in Columbus was whatever Dutton and his gang decided it would be. "We'll start the bidding at $50, Dutton announced. "50, called a man in a stained vest. "75, shouted another. Fiona closed her eyes briefly, praying for strength, for some miracle that would deliver her from this nightmare. When she opened them again, she noticed a man standing apart from the crowd, leaning against the post of the general store across the street. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty brown Stetson pulled low over his eyes. Unlike the others, he wasn't shouting or leering. He stood perfectly still, watching with an intensity that made her breath catch. $100. The bidding continued to climb. $125. $150. Dutton grinned, clearly pleased with the proceedings. 2 of his men flanked Fiona on the platform, their presence a reminder that escape was impossible. She had tried once, 3 days ago, and still bore the bruises from that attempt. $200. The shout came from a rail-thin man with a scar running down his cheek. Mort Simmons owned a ranch 20 miles north, and Fiona had heard whispers about what happened to women who disappeared into his compound. The crowd fell momentarily silent at the sum. $200 was more than most men in Columbus made in 6 months. Dutton's grin widened. "200 going once," he began. "300. The voice was quiet but carried clearly across the street. Every head turned toward the man in the brown Stetson as he pushed off from the post and walked forward with measured steps. Fiona's heart hammered as she watched him approach. He moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to danger, his hand resting naturally near the Colt revolver holstered at his hip. As he drew closer, she could see his face beneath the hat's brim. He looked to be in his late 20s, with strong features, a jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of storm clouds. There was something in those eyes, a depth and intelligence that set him apart from every other man present. "Well now," Dutton said, his jovial tone not quite masking his irritation. "Looks like we've got ourselves a serious bidder. That's 300 from the stranger. Anyone care to top it, Mort Simmons scowled, his hand tightening on his belt. 325. The man in the Stetson didn't hesitate. 500. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. $500 was a fortune, enough to buy a prime piece of land or a dozen horses. Fiona stared at him, trying to understand what was happening, why anyone would pay such an amount. Simmons opened his mouth, then closed it again, his face flushing red with anger. He spat into the dirt and turned away, shoving through the crowd. Dutton's eyes narrowed as he studied the stranger. "You got $500 on you, friend, or are you just talking big?" The man reached into his vest and withdrew a leather pouch, which he tossed onto the platform. It landed with a heavy clink. "Count it." One of Dutton's men snatched up the pouch and dumped the contents into his palm. Gold coins glinted in the afternoon sun. He counted carefully, his lips moving, then nodded to Dutton. "It's all here, boss." Dutton's smile returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Well then, sold to the gentleman in the brown hat. She's all yours." The man climbed onto the platform with fluid grace. Up close, Fiona could see a small scar above his left eyebrow and the weariness that lingered in his expression despite his youth. He met her gaze directly, and she was startled by what she saw there, not lust or triumph, but something almost like apology. "Come on," he said quietly, extending his hand. She hesitated, her mind racing. This man had just purchased her like livestock, and yet something in his manner gave her pause. He didn't grab her or make demands. He simply waited, his hand outstretched, giving her a choice even when they both knew she had none. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and steady as he helped her down from the platform. The crowd began to disperse, some grumbling about the entertainment being over, others casting envious glances at the stranger who had won such a prize. Dutton stepped into their path before they could leave. "You new to Columbus, friend?" "Just passing through," the man replied evenly. "That's so. Seems like an awful lot of money for something you're just going to pass through with." Dutton's hand drifted toward his gun. His two men moved to flank them. Fiona felt her rescuer's hand tighten slightly on hers. When he spoke, his voice remained calm but carried an edge of steel. "You got your money, our business is concluded." For a long moment the two men stared at each other. The street had gone quiet. Fiona barely dared to breathe. Then Dutton laughed, the sound harsh and forced. "Suppose it is at that. You enjoy your purchase." The stranger led Fiona away without responding, his pace unhurried but purposeful. She could feel eyes following them as they walked down the main street toward a hitching post where a magnificent bay horse waited. The animal was easily 16 hands, well-muscled and clearly well cared for. "Can you ride?" he asked, untying the reins. "Yes," Fiona managed, her voice hoarse from disuse. They had given her little water during her captivity. He swung into the saddle, then reached down. She gripped his forearm and let him pull her up behind him. The moment she was settled, he urged the horse into a trot, then a canter as they left Columbus behind. Fiona wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid strength of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Questions tumbled through her mind, but the wind rushing past made conversation impossible. She looked back once and saw dust rising in their wake, the buildings of Columbus shrinking to specks on the horizon. They rode for over an hour before he finally slowed the horse to a walk. The landscape had transformed from flat desert to rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and juniper trees. In the distance, mountains rose purple against the darkening sky. "There's a stream up ahead," he said, the first words he had spoken since they left town. "We'll stop there for the night." Fiona found her voice. "Who are you?" "Name's Hayes Sullivan." "Why did you do that? Why did you pay all that money?" He was quiet for a long moment. Couldn't stand by and watch what was about to happen to you. But $500 money can be earned back, he said simply. Some things can't. The stream appeared as promised, a ribbon of silver winding between cottonwood trees. Hayes dismounted and helped Fiona down, his hands gentle at her waist. Her legs nearly buckled after the long ride, and he steadied her until she found her balance. "Drink," he said, gesturing to the water. "I'll see to the horse." Fiona knelt at the stream's edge and cupped her hands, bringing the cold water to her lips again and again. It was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. When she finally looked up, Hayes had unsaddled his horse and was rubbing the animal down with a piece of cloth. He worked with practiced efficiency, murmuring softly to the bay. "What's his name?" she asked. "Ranger." Hayes patted the horse's neck affectionately. "He's gotten me out of more scrapes than I can count." Fiona watched him work, trying to reconcile what had happened. This man had spent a fortune to buy her from that auction, yet he had touched her only to help her, had spoken to her like a person rather than property. It made no sense. "I don't understand," she said finally. "What do you want from me?" Hayes finished with Ranger and turned to face her fully. In the fading light, his features were softer, more approachable. "I don't want anything from you, miss," he paused. "I don't even know your name." "Fiona Brennan." "Miss Brennan, I'm going to start a fire and make some coffee. Then I'm going to explain everything, and you can decide what you want to do." "Fair enough," she nodded slowly, still wary but beginning to feel the first tentative stirrings of hope. Hayes gathered dried branches and had a small fire going within minutes. From his saddlebags, he produced a battered coffee pot, a tin of grounds, and some wrapped parcels that turned out to contain jerky and hardtack. It wasn't much, but Fiona's stomach growled at the sight. She couldn't remember the last time she had eaten. "Here." He handed her a piece of jerky and a cup of steaming coffee. "It's not fancy, but it'll keep you going." They ate in silence for a while. The fire crackled, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. Stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, more than Fiona had ever seen in the city, scattered like diamonds across black velvet. "I came to Columbus looking for Rake Dutton," Hayes said finally. "He and his gang robbed a train 6 months ago outside of Lordsburg. Killed the engineer and 2 guards. One of those guards was my brother." Fiona's breath caught. "I'm so sorry." His jaw tightened. "Daniel was 25, just got married. His wife is expecting their first child in a few months, and he'll never get to meet them." He stared into the fire. "The railroad hired Pinkertons to track Dutton down, but he's slippery. Keeps moving from town to town. I've been following him for 4 months. You're a Pinkerton agent." "Was. I quit when they told me I was getting too close, that I needed to step back because it was personal." He gave a bitter smile. "They were probably right, but I couldn't let it go. Daniel deserves justice." Fiona absorbed this information, pieces clicking into place. "So you came to Columbus to kill Dutton, to bring him in if possible, but I'll do what needs doing." Hayes met her eyes. "When I got to town this morning, I heard about the auction. Heard that Dutton had taken a woman captive and planned to sell her to the highest bidder. I couldn't stomach it. My mother would rise from her grave and haunt me forever if I stood by and let something like that happen. So you bid on me." "I bid enough that no one else could match it. Dutton's greedy. He'd rather take a sure fortune than risk losing everything. And now you're free." "Free?" Fiona laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I have no money, no possessions except the clothes on my back. My uncle is dead. I have nowhere to go." Hayes pulled a small leather purse from his vest and held it out. "There's about $80 here. It's what I had left after buying your freedom. Take it. Head to Las Cruces or El Paso. Start over somewhere far from Columbus and men like Dutton." She stared at the purse, then at him. "You're giving me money after you already spent $500. That 500 bought your freedom from Dutton. This 80 is to make sure you can do something with that freedom. He pressed the purse into her hands. I mean it, Miss Brennan. Take it. You don't owe me anything. Fiona felt tears burning in her eyes for the first time since this ordeal began. In a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty these past weeks, this stranger's kindness cut through her defenses like a knife. Why are you doing this? Because it's right. Because you deserve better than what happened to you. He stood and moved to his saddlebags, pulling out a blanket. You should get some sleep. We'll head out at first light. I'll take you to the stage line in Deeming. It's about 40 miles northwest. You can catch a coach from there to anywhere you want to go. He spread the blanket near the fire and gestured for her to take it. When she started to protest, he shook his head. I've slept on harder ground than this. Take it. Fiona wrapped herself in the blanket, feeling its warmth seep into her bones. Hayes settled on the opposite side of the fire, his back against a tree trunk, his hat pulled low. Within minutes, his breathing had evened into the steady rhythm of sleep. But Fiona lay awake, staring up at the stars, her mind churning. Hayes Sullivan had saved her life and asked nothing in return. More than that, he had given her back her dignity, treating her like a person of worth when everyone else had reduced her to an object. She thought about the way he had looked at her on that platform, the apology in his eyes. She thought about his brother, murdered by Dutton, and the wife who would raise a child without knowing their father. By the time dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, Fiona had made her decision. Hayes woke to find her sitting by the fire, which she had rebuilt and gotten burning again. She had washed her face in the stream and attempted to tame her hair into a braid. The coffee pot sat warming by the flames. Morning, he said, surprised. You didn't have to do all this. I wanted to. She poured him a cup of coffee and handed it over. Hayes, I've been thinking, I don't want to go to Deeming. His brow furrowed. If you're worried about the distance, we can make it in 2 days easy, stopping in. That's not what I mean. She took a deep breath. I want to help you get Dutton. Hayes nearly dropped his cup. Absolutely not. Hear me out, Miss Brennan. I appreciate that you want to help, but this is dangerous. Dutton has killed more men than I can count. I'm not putting you in harm's way after just getting you out of it. You need me, Fiona insisted. Dutton thinks you bought me for the usual reasons. If we go back, we're not going back. If we go back, she continued firmly, we could get close to him. He's greedy, like you said. Maybe we could convince him you want to sell me back at a profit or that you want to join his gang. Use me as an entry point. Hayes stood abruptly, his face dark. I am not using you as bait. That's final. It's not your decision. Fiona rose too, her temper flaring. You gave me my freedom, remember. That means I get to choose what I do with it, and I choose to help you bring that monster to justice. Do you know what he did to me? What his men did? She pulled down the collar of her dress, revealing an ugly purple bruise on her shoulder. Hayes's expression went cold and dangerous. They killed my uncle for his land, Fiona continued, her voice shaking. Shot him in the back like a dog. When I arrived and started asking questions, they decided I was a loose end. They kept me locked in a root cellar for 3 weeks. I heard them talking about what they'd do after the auction, how they'd track down whoever bought me and kill him so they could take me back. They thought it was funny. All the more reason for you to get as far away as possible, Hayes said tightly. Or all the more reason for me to see him pay for what he's done. She stepped closer, her green eyes blazing. You lost your brother. I lost my uncle, the only family I had left. We both want justice. Let me help you get it. Hayes was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. You don't know what you're asking. Going after Dutton means putting yourself back in his reach. If something goes wrong, then we make sure nothing goes wrong. Fiona softened her tone. Hayes, I understand you want to protect me, but I'm not a fragile thing that will shatter. I'm stronger than I look. And I'm a good liar when I need to be. Together, we have a better chance than you do alone." He studied her face, and she met his gaze steadily, willing him to see that she meant every word. Finally, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "This is a bad idea." "Probably," she agreed. "Are we doing it anyway?" A reluctant smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You're stubborn, you know that, I've been told." She smiled back, and for the first time since they met, the tension between them eased. "If we're going to do this, we need a solid plan," Hayes said, "and some ground rules. First, you do exactly as I say when it comes to dealing with Dutton. No improvising, no taking unnecessary risks." "Agreed, agreed." "Second, at the first sign that things are going south, you run. You take Ranger and you ride for the nearest town with a real lawman. No arguments, no looking back." Fiona hesitated, then nodded. "All right. And third." He paused, his expression softening. "You need to know that I will do everything in my power to keep you safe. But this is dangerous and I can't guarantee what might happen. If you want to change your mind, now's the time." "I won't change my mind," she said quietly. "Let's finish this." They spent the rest of the morning planning. Hayes explained that Dutton had a ranch about 15 miles south of Columbus, near the Mexican border. He operated out of there when he wasn't in town, using it as a base for his smuggling and rustling operations. If they were going to catch him, that's where they needed to go. "The story is this," Hayes said as they saddled Ranger. "I came back because I realized I made a mistake. $500 is a lot of money, and I got to thinking about how I could make it back. Dutton runs various enterprises, maybe he needs another gun. I'll say I'm willing to work for him in exchange for a cut of whatever jobs he is going. You're my leverage, proof that I'm serious. And if he tries to take me back, he won't. Not if he thinks I'm valuable. Men like Dutton always need good gunmen, and after yesterday, he knows I'm not afraid to spend money or stand my ground. That makes me interesting to him." Hayes helped her onto Ranger, then swung up behind her. "But Fiona, if at any point you feel unsafe, you tell me. We'll call the whole thing off." "I will," she promised. They rode back toward Columbus, this time taking a longer route that would bring them to Dutton's ranch from the west. The landscape grew more desolate as they traveled, the vegetation sparse and the earth cracked from heat. By mid-afternoon, they spotted the ranch in the distance, a sprawling collection of buildings surrounded by a wooden fence. Hayes reined Ranger to a stop on a low ridge overlooking the property. "That's it. See the bunkhouse on the left. Probably 6 to 8 men sleeping there. Main house in the center, that's where Dutton will be. Barn on the right, and those smaller structures are likely storage." Fiona studied the layout, her heart beginning to pound. "How do we approach?" Bold and direct. "Anything else will make them suspicious." He urged Ranger forward down the slope. As they drew closer, a man emerged from the bunkhouse, rifle in hand. "That's far enough. State your business." Hayes reined in. "Tell Dutton that Hayes Sullivan is here to talk business. He'll want to hear what I have to say." The guard squinted at them, recognition dawning. "You're the one who bought the girl yesterday." "That's right. Now go get your boss." The guard hesitated, then ducked back inside. Minutes ticked by slowly. Fiona could feel the tension in Hayes's body, the coiled readiness. His hand rested near his gun. Finally, the door to the main house opened and Rake Dutton stepped out, followed by 2 of his men. He stood on the porch, thumbs hooked in his belt, a grin spreading across his face. "Well, well. Didn't expect to see you again so soon, Sullivan. Come to return damaged goods." Hayes dismounted and helped Fiona down, keeping himself between her and Dutton. "Nothing damaged about her, but I've been thinking about our transaction yesterday, and I've got a proposition for you." "That's so." Dutton's eyes flicked to Fiona, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. What kind of proposition? The kind that could make us both money. Mind if we come inside and talk? Dutton considered this, his grin fading into a more calculating expression. All right. But your lady friend stays with my men while we chat. Insurance, you understand. Hayes stiffened. She stays with me, then we got nothing to talk about. Dutton turned to go back inside. Wait. Hayes's voice was hard. Fine, but she's not to be touched. Any of your men lay a hand on her and our deal is off before it starts. Dutton laughed. Protective, aren't you? All right, Sullivan, no one will touch her. He nodded to his men. Make sure the lady is comfortable. Sullivan, come with me. Fiona met Hayes's eyes as he passed her, trying to convey that she would be all right. He gave an almost imperceptible nod, then followed Dutton into the house. Left outside with 3 of Dutton's men, Fiona forced herself to remain calm. They led her to a bench near the bunkhouse and told her to sit. She did, folding her hands in her lap and keeping her expression neutral even as her mind raced. Inside the house, Hayes faced Dutton across a scarred wooden table. The interior was surprisingly well appointed, with furniture that spoke of wealth taken from others and walls decorated with weapons and animal trophies. So talk, Dutton said, pouring himself a whiskey. He didn't offer Hayes any. I spent $500 yesterday on impulse, Hayes began, his tone businesslike. Then I got to thinking that's a hell of an investment with no return. I'm good with a gun, good at planning jobs. Word around Columbus is you're always looking for capable men. I figure we could work something out. Dutton leaned back in his chair, studying Hayes. Why would I hire you? I don't know you from Adam. You know I'm not afraid to throw money around. You know I stood up to you in front of the whole town. And you can ask anyone from here to Texas. Hayes Sullivan is one of the best shots in the territory. Hayes Sullivan. Dutton rolled the name around. Can't say I've heard of you. That's because I've been working up north, Colorado and Wyoming mostly. But I'm looking for warmer weather and better opportunities. Hayes leaned forward. I heard about the train job outside Lordsburg. Clean, professional, good take. That's the kind of work I want to be part of. A flicker of interest crossed Dutton's face. You heard about that, did you? Hard not to. 5,000 in gold and cash. That's impressive. Dutton's chest puffed slightly. It was a good job, my planning, my execution. Hayes knew he had him now. Men like Dutton couldn't resist bragging. What's your next target? Now hold on, Dutton said, though he was smiling. You think I'm just going to share my plans with a stranger who walks into my ranch? I think you're smart enough to recognize talent when you see it. And I think you're planning something big, something that requires more men than you currently have. Hayes paused, then played his final card. There's a silver shipment coming through from Silver City next week. I know the route, I know the timing. With the right crew, it's an easy $20,000. You interested? Dutton's eyes gleamed with avarice. How do you know about this shipment? I have contacts at the mining company. They owe me for some work I did. Hayes was making it all up, banking on Dutton's greed to override his caution. I bring you this information, help you plan and execute the job, and I get an equal cut. That's my offer. For a long moment, Dutton said nothing. Then he stood and extended his hand. Welcome to the crew, Sullivan. But know this, you cross me, you so much as think about crossing me, and I'll gut you slow. Understood? Hayes shook his hand, his stomach churning at the contact. Understood, we have a deal. They emerged from the house to find Fiona still sitting on the bench, looking remarkably composed given the circumstances. Hayes fought to keep his relief from showing. Your lady can stay in the spare room in the main house, Dutton said. You'll bunk with the men while you're here. Appreciate it, Hayes said, though the thought of being separated from Fiona made his chest tight with worry. That evening, as the ranch settled into night, Hayes managed to catch a few private moments with Fiona near the well. He drew water while she stood nearby, their conversation too low for anyone else to hear. "Are you all right?" he asked urgently. "I'm fine. They didn't touch me." She glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "Did it work?" He bought the story. "I'm in." Hayes's jaw tightened. "There's a problem, though. He wants me bunking with his men, getting to know the crew. You'll be in the house close to him. I can handle it." "Fiona, Hayes, this was always going to be dangerous. We knew that going in." She touched his arm lightly. "I'll be careful. You do the same." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then up into her green eyes. In the fading light, she was beautiful, but more than that, she was brave. Braver than she had any right to be after what she had been through. Something shifted in his chest, an unfamiliar feeling that he didn't have time to examine. "Tomorrow night," he said quietly, "after everyone's asleep, I'll come to your window. We'll figure out our next move then." She nodded, then withdrew her hand as one of Dutton's men emerged from the bunkhouse. Hayes finished drawing water and handed her the bucket, their fingers brushing briefly. Then they parted, and Hayes forced himself not to look back as she walked toward the main house. The bunkhouse was exactly what Hayes expected: dirty, cramped, and smelling of sweat and tobacco. 7 other men bunked there, a rough collection of outlaws and drifters. They eyed Hayes with varying degrees of suspicion and hostility as he claimed an empty cot near the door. "So you're the fool who paid $500 for a woman," one of them said with a sneer. He was young, maybe 20, with a patchy beard and mean eyes. "Seems like it worked out," Hayes replied evenly, settling onto the cot. "I'm here, aren't I, for now?" Dutton goes through hired guns like most men go through whiskey. You'll probably be dead within a month. Another man, older with a scar bisecting his lip, laughed. "Don't mind Jed. He's just sore because Dutton wouldn't let him bid at the auction." Jed's face flushed. "Shut your mouth, Curtis." Hayes ignored their bickering, focusing instead on gathering information. Over the next few hours, as the men played cards and drank, he learned the layout of Dutton's operation. The gang numbered about 12 men total, with 3 or 4 usually out on various jobs at any given time. Dutton kept his money in a safe in the main house, along with documents that outlined his various criminal enterprises. The ranch was well defended, with men on watch throughout the night. It was nearly midnight when the bunkhouse finally quieted, the men settling into sleep punctuated by snores and occasional mutters. Hayes waited another hour, then slipped silently from his cot and out the door. The ranch yard was dark except for a single lantern burning near the barn where the night watch made his rounds. Hayes kept to the shadows, moving around the perimeter of the main house until he found Fiona's window on the 2nd floor. A faint light glowed behind the curtain. He picked up a small pebble and tossed it gently at the glass. A moment later, the curtain moved and Fiona's face appeared. She opened the window carefully, the hinges protesting slightly. "Hayes," she whispered. "It's me. Are you all right?" "Yes." "Dutton tried to have dinner with me, but I claimed exhaustion and he let me retire early. I've been alone since." Relief flooded through Hayes. "Good. Listen, I've been learning about his operation. There are 12 men, heavily armed. The main house has a safe where he keeps everything important. I need to find a way to get the law out here, but the nearest honest marshal is 2 days' ride away in Silver City." "What about the silver shipment you mentioned? Is that real?" "No, I made it up to get him to trust me, but now I need to deliver on it or he'll know something's wrong." Hayes ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I'm working on a plan, but I need more time. I might be able to help with that." Fiona leaned out the window slightly, her braid falling over her shoulder. "Dutton talks when he drinks, and he drinks a lot. If I can get him talking, maybe I can learn something useful. Weaknesses, patterns where he keeps the evidence that could convict him. That means spending time with him, letting him think." Hayes couldn't finish the sentence. I know what it means. And I'm willing to do it if it helps us stop him. Her voice was steady, determined. Hayes, we're here now. We have to see this through. He knew she was right, but the thought of Fiona anywhere near Dutton made him want to grab her and ride as far from this place as possible. When had she become more to him than just a woman he had rescued? When had her safety become something that mattered beyond simple human decency? Be careful, he said finally. Don't push too hard. If he suspects anything, I won't. She smiled down at him, and in the moonlight she looked like something from a dream. You be careful, too. I've grown rather fond of you, Hayes Sullivan. The words hit him like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to respond, but the sound of footsteps made them both freeze. The night watchman was making his rounds, his lantern bobbing closer. Go, Fiona whispered urgently. Hayes melted back into the shadows, his heart pounding. He watched from behind the corner of a shed as the watchman passed, then made his way back to the bunkhouse. The next 3 days fell into a tense routine. Hayes spent his time with Dutton's men, establishing himself as a competent gunman and learning everything he could about their operations. He went on a rustling run with 4 of them, driving stolen cattle across the border into Mexico, where they were sold to unscrupulous ranchers. He hated every moment of it, but the experience gave him credibility and earned grudging respect from the other outlaws. Meanwhile, Fiona worked her own angle. She took meals with Dutton, enduring his crude attempts at charm and carefully drawing information out of him. She learned that he kept detailed records of all his job's insurance, he called it, in case any of his men tried to double-cross him. The safe was behind a painting in his study, and he carried the combination written on a piece of paper in his vest pocket. Each night, Hayes found a way to steal a few moments with her at her window. They compared notes, refined their plan, and gradually developed a strategy. There's a cattle auction in Columbus in 4 days, Fiona told him on the 3rd night. Dutton's planning to attend. Apparently he wants to scope out potential rustling targets. Most of his men will go with him, leaving only a skeleton crew here at the ranch. Hayes's mind raced. That's our opportunity. If we can get those records from the safe and get word to the marshal in Silver City, he could gather a posse and catch Dutton red-handed at the auction. How do we get the combination? He keeps it with him always. We'll have to steal it. Hayes thought for a moment. Tomorrow night, Dutton's hosting a card game with some of his men. I'll make sure he drinks enough that he passes out. While he's unconscious, you get the paper from his vest. I'll open the safe and copy the records. Then we ride for Silver City. And leave him here to potentially discover what we've done. We'll have a head start. And once we reach the marshal, Dutton's days of freedom are numbered. Hayes looked up at her seriously. Fiona, this is our best shot, but it's going to be dangerous. Last chance to back out. She shook her head firmly. I'm not backing out. We end this tomorrow. The following evening, Hayes sat at Dutton's card table with 4 other men, including Dutton himself. The room was thick with cigar smoke and the smell of whiskey. Hayes played conservatively, folding early in most hands, his focus on keeping Dutton's glass full. You're not much of a card player, Sullivan, Dutton observed as he raked in another pot. I prefer simpler games, Hayes replied with a shrug. This one requires too much thinking. Dutton laughed and downed his whiskey. Hayes immediately refilled it. Another hand. They played for 3 hours. Gradually, Dutton's coordination began to suffer. His words slurred slightly, his eyes growing unfocused. When he finally pushed back from the table and announced he was retiring, he had to steady himself against the wall. Need help, boss? One of the men asked. I'm fine, Dutton growled, though he clearly wasn't. He staggered toward his bedroom on the 1st floor, leaving the others to continue playing. Hayes waited 20 minutes, then excused himself, claiming exhaustion. He slipped out of the house and circled to Fiona's window. She was already waiting. He just went to his room, Hayes whispered. Give him 10 minutes to pass out completely, then go down. His bedroom is the first door on the right. Fiona nodded, her face pale but determined. I can do this. I know you can. Hayes reached up and squeezed her hand. I'll be at the study window. Once you have the combination, bring it to me there. She disappeared from the window. Hayes moved around the house to the study, which was thankfully on the ground floor. The window was locked, but he produced a thin piece of metal from his pocket and worked it carefully until the latch gave. The window swung open silently. Inside, the study was dark except for moonlight filtering through the curtains. Hayes could see the large painting on the far wall, a garish depiction of a bullfight. Behind it would be the safe. Minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Hayes crouched by the window, every nerve on edge. Where was Fiona? What if Dutton had woken? What if a soft tap at the door made him freeze? Then Fiona slipped inside, closing the door behind her. She held up a small piece of paper triumphantly. Hayes released a breath he didn't know he was holding. Together they approached the painting. Hayes carefully lifted it from its hook and set it aside, revealing the safe. It was a good quality model, heavy and well constructed. But with the combination, it was simply a matter of turning the dial. Fiona held the paper close to catch the moonlight while Hayes worked. Left to 32, right to 17, left to 5, right to 29. The final tumbler clicked into place and the door swung open. Inside were stacks of cash, several leather pouches that likely contained gold or jewels, and a thick ledger. Hayes grabbed the ledger and quickly paged through it. His breath caught. Dutton had documented everything: dates, locations, amounts stolen, names of his accomplices, even rough maps of jobs. It was enough to hang him 10 times over. We need to copy the most important pages, Hayes whispered. He pulled paper and a pencil from the desk and began working furiously, Fiona holding the ledger open to catch the light. They worked together in tense silence, the scratch of pencil on paper sounding thunderously loud to Hayes's ears. 20 minutes later, they had copied the key pages. Hayes returned the ledger to the safe, closed it, spun the dial, and rehung the painting. They were just moving toward the window when voices sounded in the hallway outside. "Boss wants a bottle from the study," someone said. "At this hour. Man's got a hollow leg." The door handle began to turn. Hayes grabbed Fiona and pulled her down behind the desk just as the door opened. Light from a lantern spilled into the room. Hayes held his breath, one hand protectively over Fiona as she pressed against him. "Where's he keep it?" the man asked. "Cabinet by the window." Footsteps approached their hiding place. Hayes's hand moved to his gun. If they were discovered, he would have to act fast, and any shooting would bring the whole ranch down on them. The footsteps stopped. The cabinet opened and closed. "Got it. Let's go." The men retreated, the door closing behind them. Hayes and Fiona remained frozen for a full minute before either dared to move. "That was too close," Fiona breathed. "We need to leave. Now." Hayes helped her to her feet and they climbed out the window. The ranch yard was quiet, the men either asleep or occupied elsewhere. Hayes led Fiona to the barn where Ranger was stabled. He saddled the horse quickly while Fiona kept watch. Within 5 minutes, they were leading Ranger out of the barn. Hayes helped Fiona mount, then swung up behind her. "Walk him slow until we're clear of the ranch," he murmured in her ear. "We can't risk the sound of hooves alerting anyone." They moved through the darkness at an agonizingly slow pace. Every creak of saddle leather, every jingle of bridle seemed impossibly loud. Hayes kept expecting a shout of alarm, the crack of rifle fire. but they passed through the ranch gate without incident and continued down the road. Only when they were a quarter-mile away did Hayes urge Ranger into a trot, then a canter. "We did it," Fiona said, wonder in her voice. "We actually did it." "We're not clear yet," Hayes warned, though relief was flooding through him too. "Dutton will discover the papers missing probably by morning. When he does, he'll know it was us. He'll come after us hard." "How far to Silver City?" 60 miles, maybe more. "We can make it by tomorrow evening if we push, but Ranger can't maintain this pace the whole way. We'll need to rest him periodically." They rode through the night, the stars wheeling overhead, the desert air growing cold. Fiona leaned back against Hayes, and he wrapped one arm around her waist to steady her. She fit perfectly against him, and he found himself noticing details he hadn't before: the way her hair smelled faintly of sage, the delicate strength of her frame, the sound of her breathing evening out as she dozed. When had she become so important to him? Somewhere between the auction block and tonight, she had gone from a woman he needed to save to someone he couldn't imagine being without. The realization should have frightened him, but instead it felt right, like something clicking into place. Dawn found them in rocky foothills, the terrain growing more mountainous as they traveled north. Hayes spotted a shallow cave and decided they needed to rest. Ranger was lathered with sweat, his breathing labored. "We'll hole up here for a few hours," Hayes said, helping Fiona dismount. "Let Ranger recover and get some sleep ourselves." The cave was barely more than an overhang, but it provided shelter from the rising sun. Hayes unsaddled Ranger and rubbed him down, then gave him water from their canteen and let him graze on the sparse grass nearby. Fiona sat at the cave's entrance, watching the sunrise paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Hayes settled beside her, suddenly aware of how tired he was. They had been awake for nearly 24 hours. "Thank you," Fiona said quietly. "For what?" "For everything. For saving me. For trusting me to help. For—" She turned to look at him, and the expression in her eyes made his heart skip. "For seeing me as more than just someone who needed rescuing." "Fiona, you're the bravest person I've ever met," Hayes said seriously. "What you did last night, what you've done these past days, most men wouldn't have had that kind of courage." She smiled, soft and genuine. "I think you bring out the best in me, Hayes Sullivan." They were sitting very close, close enough that Hayes could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, close enough that it would take almost nothing to lean in and kiss her. The desire to do exactly that was overwhelming. "Fiona, he began, then stopped, unsure how to put his feelings into words. She waited, her gaze steady and patient. "When I saw you on that auction block, I just knew I had to help," he continued slowly. "But it was more than that. It was like recognizing something important, something I hadn't known I was looking for. And these past days, getting to know you, seeing your strength and your kindness despite everything you've been through." He took a breath. "I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I've been falling since the moment I saw you." Fiona's eyes widened, then filled with tears. "Hayes, you don't have to say anything," he said quickly. "I know this is complicated, and I know I have no right to." She kissed him, leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, cutting off his words. Hayes froze for a heartbeat, then pulled her close, kissing her back with all the emotion he had been holding in. She tasted like coffee and hope, and he felt something in his chest crack open, letting light flood in. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fiona smiled at him with a joy that transformed her face. "I've been falling in love with you too. I tried not to, tried to tell myself it was just gratitude or the danger making me feel things that weren't real. But they are real, Hayes. You're real, and what I feel for you is the most real thing I've ever known." He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring it. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "When this is over," he said against her lips, "when Dutton is behind bars and you're safe, I want to court you properly. Take you to dinners, walk with you in the evening, introduce you to my family." "I would like that very much," she whispered. They held each other as the sun climbed higher, both knowing that the danger wasn't over, that Dutton was likely already on their trail. But for this moment, they had each other, and that was enough. They dozed for a few hours, taking turns keeping watch. When the sun reached its zenith, Hayes deemed Ranger sufficiently rested and they set out again. The terrain grew more challenging, the path winding through narrow canyons and steep switchbacks. But it also provided cover, making it harder for anyone following to spot them. Late afternoon found them on a ridge overlooking a vast valley. In the distance, Hayes could see buildings clustered together. Silver City. "There," he said, pointing. "We're almost there." Fiona sagged with relief. "Thank goodness, I don't think I could ride much further." They began the descent, but had only gone a mile when the crack of rifle fire echoed through the canyon. Ranger screamed and stumbled, blood blossoming on his flank. Hayes fought to keep him upright as more shots rang out. "It's Dutton," Fiona cried, looking back. Hayes spotted them, 6 riders thundering up the canyon behind them, Dutton in the lead. They were still several hundred yards away, but closing fast. "Hold on." Hayes urged Ranger forward despite the horse's injury. They raced down the winding path, rocks and dirt flying under Ranger's hooves. The faithful horse gave everything he had, but he was wounded and exhausted, and their pursuers were on fresh mounts. Another shot whined past Hayes's ear. They were getting closer. Up ahead, the canyon opened onto flat ground, which would leave them exposed. But Hayes spotted something else, a narrow side canyon, barely more than a crack in the rocks. He turned Ranger sharply, guiding him into the gap. The walls rose high on either side, so close they could barely fit. The canyon twisted and turned, providing cover from the gunfire. "Where are we going?" Fiona asked. "I don't know, but we can't outrun them in the open." Hayes urged Ranger deeper into the canyon. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit echoed off the rock walls. The canyon dead ended in a small box canyon, maybe 50 yards across, with sheer walls on 3 sides. Hayes's heart sank. They were trapped. He jumped down and helped Fiona dismount, then slapped Ranger on the flank. "Go, boy, get out of here." The wounded horse limped back the way they had come, hopefully drawing some of the pursuit away. Hayes grabbed Fiona's hand and looked around desperately. "They're a pile of boulders that would provide some cover." They scrambled behind the rocks just as Dutton and his men entered the box canyon. There were 6 of them, all armed, all wearing expressions of murderous rage. "Come on out, Sullivan," Dutton shouted. "You're trapped." "No sense in making this harder than it has to be." Hayes drew his Colt, checking the cylinder. 6 shots. He had 6 shots against 6 men, and he had to protect Fiona while figuring out how to escape. The odds were not good. "You stole from me," Dutton continued. "You made a fool of me." "That's something I can't abide." Hayes leaned close to Fiona. "There's a gap in the rocks behind us," he whispered. "Small, but you could fit through. When I start shooting, you run. Get to Silver City and find Marshal Dawson. Tell him everything." "I'm not leaving you," Fiona hissed. "You have to. Those papers won't mean anything if we're both dead." "Hayes, please." He kissed her hard. "Please, Fiona, I need you to be safe." Tears streamed down her face, but she nodded. Hayes turned back to face Dutton's men, who were spreading out, preparing to rush their position. "Last chance, Sullivan," Dutton called. Hayes stood, his gun raised. "You want these papers, Dutton, come and get them." He fired 3 shots in rapid succession. One man went down clutching his shoulder, the others scattered, returning fire. Bullets sparked off the rocks around Hayes as he ducked back down. "Go!" he shouted to Fiona. She hesitated one more second, her eyes locked on his, then turned and squeezed through the gap in the rocks. Hayes heard her scrambling up the slope beyond and prayed she would make it. He popped up and fired again, forcing Dutton's men to take cover. 4 shots left. He had to make every one count. A bullet grazed his arm, leaving a burning line of pain. Hayes ignored it, focusing on the tactical situation. If he could hold them here long enough for Fiona to get clear, it would be worth it, even if he didn't make it out himself. But then he heard voices from above. More of Dutton's men approaching from the canyon rim. They must have split up, sent some around to cut off any escape. Fiona was running right into them. Without thinking, Hayes broke from cover and ran toward the gap in the rocks. Bullets kicked up dirt at his feet. He dove through the opening, scraping his shoulders, and emerged on the other side to see Fiona 50 feet up the slope with 3 men closing in from above. "Fiona, look out!" She spun, then screamed as one of the men grabbed her. Hayes raised his gun and fired. The man dropped. 2 shots left. The other men returned fire. Hayes felt something punch into his side, a white-hot lance of pain that nearly dropped him. He staggered but stayed upright, bringing his gun to bear again. One more shot, and the second man fell. The third man had Fiona now, using her as a shield. Hayes's vision was starting to blur from blood loss, but he forced himself to focus. 1 shot left. 1 chance. "Let her go," Hayes said, his voice steady despite the pain radiating through his body. "Drop your gun or I'll put a bullet in her head," the man snarled. Hayes's mind raced. He was dying. He could feel it in the way his legs were starting to give out, the cold spreading from his wound. But Fiona was still alive. That's all that mattered. "All right," he said, lowering his gun. "Just don't hurt her." The moment the man relaxed his grip slightly, Fiona drove her elbow back into his stomach. He doubled over, gasping, and she twisted free. Hayes raised his gun and fired his last shot. The man collapsed. Then Fiona was there, catching Hayes as his legs finally gave out. They sank to the ground together, his blood soaking into the dust. "Hayes, no, no, no," Fiona sobbed, pressing her hands to the wound in his side. "Don't you dare leave me, don't you dare." "The papers," he gasped. "Get them to the marshal." "I'm not leaving you." Behind them, Hayes could hear Dutton and the remaining men making their way through the gap. They had minutes at most. "Fiona, please," the thunder of hoofbeats cut him off. Hayes's fading vision registered movement at the top of the canyon riders, dozens of them, pouring over the rim. The lead rider wore a marshal's star that caught the sunlight. "United States Marshal," a voice boomed. "Throw down your weapons." Dutton's men, seeing themselves vastly outnumbered, dropped their guns. Dutton himself tried to run but was quickly tackled and subdued. The marshal, a grizzled man in his 50s, climbed down to where Hayes and Fiona lay. "Someone in town said they saw riders heading this way, shots fired. Figured I'd investigate." His eyes widened as he saw the blood. "This man needs a doctor now." "The papers," Hayes tried to say, but the world was going dark. The last thing he was aware of was Fiona's voice calling his name and her hand gripping his desperately. He woke to whiteness, white walls, white sheets, white sunlight filtering through gauze curtains. For a moment he couldn't remember where he was or what had happened. Then the pain in his side reminded him and the memories came flooding back. "Hayes." Fiona's face appeared above him, beautiful and tear-streaked. "Oh, thank God you're awake." "What, where?" His voice was barely a croak. "You're in Silver City. The doctor operated on you 2 days ago. The bullet went clean through, missed anything vital by inches." She laughed, the sound edged with hysteria. "You nearly died, you stubborn man, nearly died saving me." Hayes managed a weak smile. "Worth it." Don't you ever do that again." She leaned down and kissed him gently, mindful of his injuries. "I can't lose you, Hayes Sullivan. I just found you." Dutton, in jail, along with what's left of his gang. The marshal had already been investigating him based on information from other sources. "Our papers provided the final proof he needed. Dutton will hang for his crimes, including the murder of your brother." Relief washed through Hayes, so intense it left him dizzy. "Daniel can rest now, and so can you." Fiona stroked his hair back from his forehead. "The doctor says you need several weeks to heal. I'm not leaving your side. Your uncle's property is being held for me. The territorial court has ruled that Dutton's claim on it was fraudulent. I'm the rightful owner." She smiled. "Though I don't know what I'll do with a general store in Columbus. I'm not sure I ever want to go back there." "Then don't. Come with me." Hayes caught her hand, holding it against his chest. "I have a small ranch in Colorado, nothing fancy, but it's good land, clean water. When I'm healed, we could go there together. Build something new." Fiona's eyes shone. "Are you asking me to come live with you, Hayes Sullivan? Because that's quite scandalous if we're not married." "Then marry me." The words came out before he could think about them, but the moment he said them, Hayes knew they were right. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a short time, but I love you, Fiona Brennan. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Marry me." She laughed and cried at the same time. "Yes. Yes, of course yes." They kissed, and Hayes felt a joy so profound it eclipsed even the pain of his injuries. He had come to New Mexico seeking vengeance for his brother's death. He had found that, but so much more. He had found love, found purpose, found a future worth living for. The weeks that followed passed slowly as Hayes healed. Fiona stayed at the boarding house next to the doctor's office, visiting him every day. They talked for hours, learning everything about each other. Hayes told her about his childhood on a farm in Missouri, about his parents who had died of fever when he was 20, about Daniel and his wife Catherine, who was still waiting in Lordsburg for news of her husband's killer being brought to justice. Fiona shared her own history growing up in Boston, losing her parents in a tenement fire, coming west to start over with her uncle. She spoke of dreams deferred and hopes almost lost. But she also spoke of new dreams, of a future with Hayes that seemed almost too good to be true. On the 4th week after the shooting, Hayes finally received clearance from the doctor to travel. He was still weak, but the wound had closed cleanly and showed no signs of infection. The marshal had sent word to Catherine about Dutton's capture, and she had written back, thanking Hayes and inviting him and Fiona to visit before they headed to Colorado. They made the journey to Lordsburg slowly, Hayes still unable to ride for long periods without pain. But Fiona never complained, never rushed him. She seemed content simply to be with him, to talk and laugh and plan their future. Catherine lived in a small house on the edge of town, her belly round with pregnancy. When she opened the door and saw Hayes, she burst into tears. "You look like him," she said, hugging Hayes carefully. "You have Daniel's eyes." They spent the afternoon together, and Hayes told Catherine everything about tracking Dutton, about the evidence that would ensure he hanged, about Fiona's bravery. Catherine wept for her husband, but there was a sense of closure in her grief now, a knowledge that justice had been served. Before they left, Catherine gave Hayes a package. "Daniel's things. I want you to have them, especially this." She pulled out a silver pocket watch. "Your father gave it to Daniel on his 18th birthday. Daniel would want you to have it now." Hayes accepted the watch with trembling hands. Inside the cover was an inscription, "To Daniel with love. May you always find your way home." He closed his eyes, grief and gratitude warring in his chest. "Thank you," he managed. Catherine smiled through her tears. "Take care of each other. Daniel would be happy knowing you found someone to love, Hayes. Don't waste the time you've been given. They left Lordsburg the next morning, heading north toward Colorado. The landscape gradually transformed as they traveled, the harsh desert giving way to grasslands, then rolling hills, and finally mountains capped with snow. 3 weeks after leaving Lordsburg, they reached Hayes's ranch. It was a modest spread in a high valley, with a creek running through it and views of distant peaks. The house was small but solidly built, with 2 bedrooms and a wide front porch. A barn stood nearby, currently empty but waiting for the horses and cattle Hayes planned to acquire. "It's beautiful," Fiona breathed, taking it all in. "It will be even better once we fix it up," Hayes said. The place had sat empty for months while he was tracking Dutton, and it showed. But the bones were good, and with work it could be a real home. They were married the following Sunday in the small church in the nearby town of Fairplay. Hayes wore his best suit, and Fiona wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself. The ceremony was small, just the minister, his wife, and a few neighbors who had heard about the wedding, but it was perfect. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Hayes kissed Fiona with all the love and gratitude he felt, and she kissed him back with equal passion. They were both laughing when they finally broke apart, joy bubbling up irrepressibly. The first year of their marriage was hard work but deeply satisfying. Hayes's injury healed completely, though he would always carry the scar. Together they repaired the house, painted the walls, built furniture. Fiona started a vegetable garden that flourished in the mountain soil. Hayes purchased cattle and 3 horses, including a beautiful chestnut mare for Fiona. They worked from dawn to dusk most days, but the work felt meaningful, building something that was truly theirs. And at night, they would sit on the porch together, Hayes's arm around Fiona's shoulders, watching the stars come out and counting their blessings. In October, nearly a year after they had met, Fiona told Hayes she was pregnant. He whooped with joy and spun her around, then immediately set her down carefully, worried he had been too rough. She laughed at his concern. "I'm not made of glass, Hayes." "No, but you're carrying something precious. Our child." He placed his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "I'm going to be a father." "And you're going to be wonderful at it," Fiona assured him, covering his hand with hers. Their daughter was born the following June, in the bedroom of their ranch house with the help of a midwife from town. Hayes held Fiona's hand through the long labor, marveling at her strength. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, he felt his heart expand in ways he hadn't known were possible. "She has your eyes," Fiona said tiredly, cradling the infant. "And your hair," Hayes replied, stroking the baby's downy red curls. "She's perfect. You're perfect." They named her Grace Danielle Sullivan, the middle name honoring Hayes's brother. Hayes wrote to Catherine, telling her about the baby, about the life he and Fiona were building. Catherine wrote back with congratulations and news that she had given birth to a son 3 months earlier, whom she had named Daniel for his father. The years passed in a blur of work and love and laughter. Grace grew into a bright, energetic child who loved helping her father with the horses and learning to cook with her mother. 2 years after Grace, Fiona gave birth to a son they named James, and 2 years after that, another daughter, Eleanor. The ranch prospered. Hayes proved to have a gift for breeding horses, and his stock became known throughout the territory for quality and temperament. Fiona established herself as a skilled seamstress, taking in orders from wealthy families in Denver and elsewhere. Together, they built not just a home but a legacy. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Hayes took Fiona back to Fairplay for dinner at the town's finest restaurant. It was a rare night away from the children, who were being watched by their neighbors. Over steak and wine, they toasted to the decade they had spent together. "Do you ever think about that day in Columbus?" Fiona asked, her green eyes soft in the candlelight. "About how differently things could have gone." "All the time," Hayes admitted. "If I had arrived an hour later, if I hadn't had that money, if Dutton had suspected what we were doing." He shook his head. "We were so lucky, Fiona. It wasn't just luck. It was courage and love and stubbornness," she smiled. "Mostly stubbornness, if I'm honest," he laughed. "I can't argue with that. Hayes, I need you to know something." Fiona reached across the table and took his hand. "That day on the auction block was the worst day of my life. But it was also the day I met you, which makes it the best day too. Everything good I have, everything I am now, started with you being brave enough and kind enough to step in when you didn't have to. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." Hayes felt tears prick his eyes. "You saved me too. I was so lost after Daniel died, so angry. You gave me a reason to be more than just vengeance and grief. You gave me love and hope and a family. You made me want to be a better man." They kissed across the table, ignoring the amused looks from other diners. After 10 years and 3 children, they were still as in love as they had been that first day, still capable of making each other's hearts race. As they walked back to their hotel that night, Fiona leaned her head on Hayes's shoulder. "What do you think the next 10 years will bring?" "More of the same, I hope," Hayes replied. "More work, more laughter, more children if we're blessed. Growing old together on that ranch, watching our kids grow up strong and good." "That sounds perfect," Fiona sighed contentedly, and it was perfect in all the ways that mattered. Not because their life was without challenges. There were hard winters, sick animals, crops that failed, and the endless struggle of making a living from the land. But they faced everything together, Hayes and Fiona, partners in every sense of the word. Their children grew healthy and happy, learning from their parents the values of hard work, honesty, and compassion. Grace married a young lawyer from Denver when she was 22, and Hayes walked her down the aisle with pride bursting from his chest. James took over more and more of the ranch operations as he got older, showing the same gift for horses that his father had. Eleanor, the youngest, surprised them all by announcing at 16 that she wanted to be a doctor, and Hayes and Fiona scraped together the money to send her to medical school in Boston. On their 20th anniversary, Hayes and Fiona took a trip back to New Mexico. Not to Columbus, that town had largely been abandoned after Dutton's gang was broken up, but to Silver City, where Hayes had nearly died in Fiona's arms. They visited the canyon, where the final confrontation had taken place. It looked smaller than Hayes remembered, less menacing in the bright sunshine. They stood at the spot where Hayes had fallen, and Fiona slipped her hand into his. "Sometimes I still have nightmares about that day," she confessed. "About losing you, but you didn't lose me. I'm right here and I'm not going anywhere." Hayes pulled her close. "We've had 20 years together, Fiona, 20 years of joy and love. That's more than a lot of people get in a lifetime." "I want 40 more," she said fiercely. 60. I want every year we can possibly have." "Then that's what we'll take," Hayes promised. "Every single one." They traveled to Lordsburg to visit Catherine, who had remarried a few years after Daniel's death and now had a large, boisterous family. Young Daniel, who was now 19, looked startlingly like his father. He and Hayes talked for hours, and Hayes told him stories about the uncle he had never met. "He would be proud of you," Hayes told the young man. "You've grown into someone fine." "I wish I could have known him," Daniel replied. "So do I. But his memory lives on in you, in your siblings, in the way your mother raised you. That's a kind of immortality, I think." From Lordsburg, they traveled north to Colorado, back to their ranch. As they crested the final hill and saw their home spread out below the house that was now twice its original size, the barn that had been rebuilt and expanded, the pastures dotted with horses and cattle. Hayes felt a profound sense of satisfaction. "We did it," he said softly. "We built something lasting." Fiona smiled, her face lined now with age but still beautiful to him. "We did indeed." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. Hayes's hair turned silver, then white. Fiona moved a bit slower, her hands sometimes aching from arthritis. But they were healthy and active well into their 60s, still working the ranch alongside James and his growing family. Grace gave them 4 grandchildren, James 3, and a leaner, who had indeed become a doctor, eventually married and had 2 children of her own. The ranch house rang with the laughter of grandchildren during holidays and summers, the sound sweeter than any music Hayes had ever heard. On a cool evening in autumn, when Hayes was 68 and Fiona 67, they sat together on the porch as they had done countless times before. The mountains were painted gold by the setting sun, and the air smelled of pine and approaching winter. "You have any regrets?" Fiona asked suddenly. Hayes considered the question seriously. His body ached in ways it hadn't when he was young. He missed his brother every day, missed his parents. There were business deals that hadn't worked out, arguments he wished he had handled differently, moments he would change if he could. "No," he said finally. "Not about anything that matters. Not about us." Fiona leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting into the curve of his body as naturally as she had 45 years ago. "Good, because I don't have any either. My life has been exactly what I wanted it to be, even though it started so terribly. With Columbus and the auction, and even then," she interrupted, "because all of that brought me to you, and you, Hayes Sullivan, were worth everything." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I love you, Fiona. I've loved you since that first day, and I'll love you until my last day and beyond." "And I love you," she replied, "always and forever." They sat together as darkness fell and stars emerged, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a life of profound meaning and joy. Around them, the ranch settled into evening, horses nickering in the barn, cattle bedding down in the pastures, the wind rustling through the trees. Inside the house, lights glowed warmly. Through the windows, they could see their son James and his wife preparing dinner, their grandchildren setting the table. Soon they would be called in to eat, to share a meal with family, to continue the traditions they had established over decades. But for this moment, Hayes and Fiona simply sat together, hand in hand, grateful for every day they had been given. They had started as strangers brought together by circumstance and cruelty. They had become partners, lovers, best friends. They had raised children and built a legacy. They had turned darkness into light and pain into purpose. And through it all, from that first moment when Hayes had outbid everyone to walk Fiona off that auction platform to this peaceful evening on their porch, they had loved each other with a fierceness and faithfulness that time could not diminish. It was, Hayes thought as he held his wife close, the very definition of a life well lived. Not perfect, not without struggle, but rich with meaning and overflowing with love. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the night embraced them, Hayes and Fiona Sullivan knew that they had found something precious and rare, a love that had not only endured but had grown deeper and stronger with each passing year. Their story had begun in darkness and desperation, but it had become a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and unwavering love. And it would continue to echo through the generations that followed, in the children and grandchildren who carried their names and their values, in the ranch that remained in the family for 100 years, in the legend that would be told and retold, the story of the cowboy who outbid them all just to walk her out. and the woman brave enough to stand beside him and build a future neither could have imagined. Years later, when Hayes was 75 and Fiona 74, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by their entire family. All three of their children were there, along with their spouses, 9 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. The ranch house could barely contain them all, but they managed, filling every room with laughter and love. At the celebration, Grace stood to make a toast. "To my parents," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've shown us what true love looks like, not the easy kind that exists only in good times, but the kind that weathers storms and grows stronger through adversity. You've taught us to be brave, to be kind, to stand up for what's right even when it's hard. Thank you for being the best example anyone could ask for." Everyone raised their glasses, echoing the sentiment. Hayes looked around at the faces of his family, his legacy, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. All of this had sprung from one moment of courage, one decision to step forward when others stepped back. That night, as they prepared for bed, Fiona moved more slowly than usual. Hayes helped her, unbuttoning the dress she could no longer manage herself, steadying her as she sat on the bed. "I'm getting old," she said with a rueful smile. "We both are," Hayes replied, settling beside her, "but I wouldn't trade these years for anything. Would you? Not for all the youth in the world." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Hayes, promise me something. Anything. When I'm gone, and don't argue, we both know I won't live forever. Promise me you'll remember the good times. Promise me you won't spend your remaining days in grief, but in gratitude for what we had." Hayes's throat tightened. "Fiona, promise me," she insisted. "I promise. But the same goes for you. If I go first, you live fully. You laugh, you love our family, you enjoy every day." "Deal," she whispered. They fell asleep holding each other as they had done for 50 years. Fiona passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 years later, on a crisp October morning when the aspens were turning gold. Hayes woke to find her hand cold in his, her face peaceful, a slight smile on her lips. Even in his grief, he could find gratitude that she had gone without pain, without suffering. The funeral was attended by over 200 people, family, friends, neighbors, people whose lives Fiona had touched over the decades. Stories were shared about her kindness, her strength, her generosity. Hayes listened to them all, crying openly, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. In the days and weeks that followed, the house felt impossibly empty. Hayes moved through it like a ghost, touching things that had been hers, remembering. He kept his promise, though he didn't shut himself away. He forced himself to eat meals with James's family, to hold his great-grandchildren, to watch the ranch operations continue. But at night, sitting alone on the porch, he would talk to Fiona as if she were still there. He told her about his day, about the grandchildren's latest adventures, about the horses James was training. And sometimes, in the whisper of wind through the pines or the call of a night bird, he could almost hear her voice answering. Hayes lived for another 5 years after Fiona's death. He remained active until the very end, still riding his horse at 82, still offering advice on ranch management, still serving as the patriarch of a family that had grown to include 14 grandchildren and 12 great-grandchildren. On a warm spring morning, Hayes went for his usual ride through the ranch. He visited all his favorite spots: the creek where he and Fiona used to fish, the meadow where they had picnicked countless times, the hill with views of the mountains that stretched into forever. At each place, he paused, remembering. When he returned to the house, he was tired in a way that felt different from simple physical exhaustion. He took a nap in his chair on the porch, the same chair where he had sat with Fiona for so many years. James found him there at sunset, still sitting peacefully, a smile on his weathered face. Hayes Sullivan had passed quietly, painlessly, dreaming perhaps of the woman he loved, the life they had built, the legacy they were leaving behind. They buried him next to Fiona in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch. His gravestone read, Hayes Sullivan, beloved husband, father, grandfather, a man who lived with courage and love. Next to it, Fiona's stone bore a similar inscription. Fiona Sullivan, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, a woman who turned darkness into light. Between the two stones, their children planted a rose bush that would bloom every summer, red flowers reaching toward the sun, a living memorial to a love that had transcended time, circumstance, and even death itself. In the years that followed, the story of Hayes and Fiona became family legend. It was told to each new generation, the tale of how their great-great-grandfather had seen a woman on an auction block and made a choice that changed everything. How he had outbid everyone not for ownership, but for freedom. How he and Fiona had fallen in love amid danger, had fought together against evil, and had built a life of extraordinary, ordinary moments. The ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to what Hayes and Fiona had created. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren walked the same paths they had walked, sat on the same porch, looked at the same mountains. And in doing so, they carried forward the values that Hayes and Fiona had embodied: courage in the face of adversity, compassion for those in need, and above all, the transformative power of love. The story of the cowboy and the woman on the auction block became more than just family history. It became a reminder that a single moment of courage can change not just two lives, but generations of lives. That love found in darkness can burn brighter than love that has never been tested. That true partnership, the kind where two people choose each other every day, through good times and bad, creates something larger than either person could have achieved alone. And so the legacy continued, spreading outward like ripples on water, touching lives that Hayes and Fiona would never know, but whose existence proved that their love story had been more than just their own. It had become something immortal, something that would echo through time as long as people believed in the power of one person's choice to stand up and do what was right. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not the hardships they had endured or the obstacles they had overcome, but the simple fact that Hayes Sullivan had seen a woman who needed help and had stepped forward without hesitation. And Fiona Brennan, given her freedom, had chosen to use it not to run away but to stand and fight beside the man who had saved her. Together, they had turned a moment of darkness into a lifetime of light. And that light continued to shine, generation after generation, a beacon of hope and love that would never fade. The sun set over the Sullivan Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, just as it had done for over a century. The house stood strong, filled now with the great-great-great-grandchildren of Hayes and Fiona. Their story was being told once again, passed down with care and reverence, ensuring that the courage and love that had defined their lives would never be forgotten. And somewhere, in whatever lay beyond this world, Hayes and Fiona Sullivan were together again, holding hands, watching the sunset, grateful for every moment they had shared and for the love that had truly conquered all.